The next combo we're going to go through is jab, straight punch, hook to body, rear low kick. Now this technique is one of the most popular techniques used across kickboxing, Muay Thai and just fight sports in general. One of the reasons why it's so good is because we're targeting several areas that are very vulnerable. So for starters, we're throwing 2 straight punches to the face, pretty much. Then we're coming to the body, liver rip, okay, which is again a very damaging spot, and then we're chopping down onto the leg. Now, in terms of tips to throwing this technique, it's really important that when you throw this straight, you kind of angle it slightly down. So tip number 1, you're coming in 1, when you throw your 2 or your straight punch, so jab, and when you throw your straight punch, you're going to angle it slightly down, okay? And the reason why we do that is because it helps us to load up the rip or the hook to the body. So tip number 1, coming through, angle that right hand slightly downward, okay? And then from there, this left hook to the body is ready to go. We're going to fire that hook into the body, okay? So this is tip number 2, pivot and hook your fist into the body. And then tip number 3, you've made contact with the body. Now what you want to do is you want to use that force and you're going to jump across and out and chop down onto the leg. 2 common mistakes that people will make with this is a lot of it is about range. So for example, they'll just be a little bit too far away. So they'll go 1, 2, hook like this, but they're not in the most optimal position to throw that rip to the body. And then from there, when they try to kick the leg, often what will happen is their foot will make contact with the person's knee or some undesirable part of their body. So to avoid this from happening, make sure that you're coming in 1, 2, and you're sitting down onto that right hand, dipping off the center line, and then you can really drive that hook right into the body, and you'll be in a much better angle to chop down onto the leg. The second mistake that most beginners will make when it comes to this combo is not leveraging off the hook to the body. So what I mean by that, once you've landed that hook, it's really important that you use that momentum and that force to propel your body across and out the other way. So you've got one amount of force traveling across the person's body this way. Then they're going to resist you, so that's going to give you a bit of room to fire back out the other side. So you hit the body, force travels out, and then you push and jump down onto the leg, okay? So from here, hit the body, use that force to push you out, jump, shift across, and chop down onto the leg. The finishing angle on the leg is super important, so making sure that you come right down and across and onto the leg, and all of that comes from that hook to the body and that force pushing you up to the other side. The next combination we're going to go through is lead uppercut to straight punch to switch kick. Now, this combination is a very, very effective one, as the angles that it works is very, very hard to read, okay? So, tip number 1 is sink that weight slightly across to the left and then pivot up into the uppercut. Tip number 2 is drive that right hand right down the middle. And then tip number 3 is once you make contact with that straight, we're going to skip these 2 legs here up into a left kick, okay? So we're going to go straight into a switch kick and seal the deal on our combination. 2 common mistakes that beginners often make when throwing this attack is that they'll just throw the uppercut with poor technique and throw the right hand straight after. So what happens there is they leave themselves very open and they often don't end up landing that uppercut to start with. Mistake number 2 is just taking a little bit too long to fire the left kick on the end, okay? So it's literally dip down, fire up, straight right. As soon as that right hand touches your opponent, you're going to skip straight through into the left kick. The next combo we're going to go through is the lead hook rear leg thigh kick. Now this technique is super effective, especially if you want to just counter an opponent that's coming in and throwing high volumes of punches at you. You just want to slow them down. It's also a really great way to chop someone's legs and just slowly start to accumulate damage up onto the leg. Now, one of the reasons why it's such a good combination is because it's very versatile. We can throw it from a lot of different positions, whether that be in close to our opponent or a little bit further away. Now, tip number one when setting the shot up. As we do when we throw a hook, we want to just dip a little bit to the side, okay? So as we dip a little bit to the sides, what that's going to do is we're going to kind of just maybe a little bit more than usual, we're going to telegraph our left hook just a tiny little bit. And the reason why we do this is because we want our opponent to react or block, dip and throw, okay? And then our hook is not the power shot. Remember that, guys, okay? Our hook is more just about getting our opponent to react and block, okay? And then that's tip number one, okay? So coming up, throwing the hook, getting them to react. Tip number two is I'm gonna step right across to the side, okay? So I'm coming up, hook, okay? From here, I'm gonna shift my angle right out to the side like this, okay? And then tip number three, I'm gonna chop down onto the leg like this, okay? So you can see there's already a lot of momentum coming onto the leg, and I'm just gonna use that momentum and chop down right into the meat of the quad or the thigh. Two of the most common mistakes that beginners make when it comes to the lead hook, rear thigh kick, is that number one, they don't step off the center line when throwing their low kick to the leg. So when you're throwing your rear kick to the thigh, it's really important that after you land that hook, you step across and out to the side. So a common mistake is the hook and then just kick like this. Hook, kick, okay? Hook, kick. But what that does is it leaves you vulnerable for a straight punch to the face. Mistake number two, and that is when you're kicking the leg, okay, just kicking like this is always sometimes not enough. What you want to do is just to give your leg that extra, your low kick, that extra bit of sting. You want to jump out. When you're about here, right before you make contact with the leg, you want to snap your leg down onto the thigh. Shut, shut. Shut, shut. The next combination that we're going to go through is the uppercut, lead hook to straight punch. Now, this combination is one that's often given out in a lot of training programs or by trainers, but it's not ever really taught 100% how for us to land it. Now, from my experience and from working with a lot of fighters, the best way to land this is to, number one, be in quite close proximity to your opponent. Once you land that uppercut and that hook, what we're trying to do is create some space. So once we hit the opponent with those two shots and they take a step back, that gives us that opportunity to throw that right hand. Going through our three top tips for this, tip number one is land your uppercut and your hook on the inside. Tip number two is make sure that there's space before you throw your rights. And then tip number three is you've made some space, make sure you bring that right foot up, and that's going to allow you to land that straight right, okay? If you don't bring the right foot up, you might find that your punch falls a little bit short. Two common mistakes that beginners will often make when using this technique. Number one, from what I've seen, is they'll just go like this. Now, I know that it's a combination and I know there's a lot of things going on, but you still want to try and pivot those feet and get your footwork in the right position, okay? So even though it's a fast combination, still try to think footwork, 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 okay? So drilling up, hook, and straight. If you notice, every time my feet, they pivot as I turn and punch. The second mistake that I often see beginners make is they don't keep their chin tucked in. Now, when you're throwing an uppercut, a hook, and a straight, sometimes you can be left quite vulnerable. So it's really important that when you throw these shots, you keep your chin glued to your chest here, okay? So from this position here, when I throw the uppercut, you can see my left hand is on my head. When I throw my hook, my right hand is on my head. And then when I step and throw my straight, my left hand is back onto my head, okay? So that is my other common mistake that I see with a lot of beginners when they start throwing this combination. It's just not being defensively responsible as they're throwing their shots. So make sure that you guys are keeping your guard tight as you throw this combination. The next combination we're going to go through is lead uppercut elbow to rear horizontal elbow. Now, this technique is a great way to split through your opponent's guard, but it can also leave you a little bit vulnerable if you're not careful. So we're going to go through that in our tips. So tip number one is when you throw your left elbow, make sure your right hand is glued to your head and your chin is tucked in. So tip number one, chin tucked in, right hand glued to your head, throwing the elbow forward, okay? When you throw your left elbow, make sure your hand is still touching onto your head here, okay? Because again, we want to maintain that wall of protection from the elbow, okay? Tip number two, when you throw your crossing elbow, your horizontal cross elbow, what you want to do is you want to keep your left hand up like this and slice through and across, okay? So then the left hand is staying up and you're keeping your chin tucked in here, dropping it through and across. Tip number three is making sure at the beginning that you take a nice big step. So guard is tight here, okay? As I come in, I'm taking a big step like so, and then crossing through like this, okay? So two common mistakes that beginners make when throwing this combination is number one, not stepping forward, okay? As with all of our elbow combinations, it's really, really important that you take that step with your front leg, okay? So it's really important, guys, that the lead leg takes a nice big step first so that you can get that momentum to land that elbow and then again to land the right elbow as well, okay? Mistake number two is just not quite getting the angle right. So you have to remember that when we're throwing the uppercut elbow, we want to get it right up the middle, okay? We're literally trying to split right in between our opponent's guard. The next combo we're going to go through is fake switch kick to straight punch. This technique is a great way to set up your straight punch, as your opponent will be expecting to block a kick and you've got to come straight through while they're only on one leg and land that big right hand. Okay, our three tips to mastering this combination. Tip number one is switch your leg back to sell them on the switch kick, okay? So from here, to set things up, I have to switch my leg back like so, okay? Once I get a reaction, once I see the leg come up, we're gonna go into tip number two. So tip number two, I'm gonna jump my legs back forward again like this, so that I'm in a staggered stance, ready to throw my straight punch, okay? Tip number three, I'm gonna choose either the head or the body, and I'm gonna drive my fist right through, either down into the body or straight through into the head, okay? So one more time, tip number one, I'm gonna sell them on my switch. Tip number two, I'm going to switch back again to a staggered stance. Tip number three, I'm going to fire my punch either to the head or to the body. Two common mistakes that a lot of beginners make when performing this technique is, number one, they don't sell the switch. So they might just go like this and then punch, okay? It's really important that you take the time to master the art of selling the switch to your opponent, okay? If they don't lift their leg up, then you shouldn't fire that punch, okay? It's really important that you get them to react first, okay? So mistake number two that I often see is that once people have sold the switch, they don't take enough time to set up the right hand. So they switch back, but they're not in a solid stance. They might just be like this, and then they try to throw that right, but it just doesn't have enough power on it, okay? So it's really important that you get that solid base of support and really drive that right hand either right into the body or right into the head. The next combination that we're going to go through is one of my personal favorites. It is the overhand punch to lead hook. It's a really effective technique against someone that is a little bit taller than you because it allows you to swing your punch upward, over and down. Okay, 3 top tips to mastering this technique. Tip number 1 is making sure that you set up your overhand. So it's really important that you block 1 or 2 of those jabs first and then work off the second or the third jab that's coming at you. And that takes us to tip number 2. So tip number 2, we're going to move our head inside of our opponent's jab and loop our overhand over the top and down onto their chin. Tip number 3, we're going to come across with the left hook, keeping our right hand up of course, okay, and that is going to be the final or the finishing move in the combination. Okay, so one more time, set up your overhand, block a few hits first. Tip 2, move inside the jab, come over and down with the overhand, and then tip number 3, come across with the left hook. 2 common mistakes that beginners make when throwing the overhand right to lead hook combination are, number 1, not setting up the overhand. So for example, being too far away from the opponent and not having any jab or any combination or counter to work off. Then just trying to swing for the fences and land that overhand. The overhand is an incredibly devastating and powerful punch, but if you don't set it up, it does leave you very, very vulnerable to a counter. Mistake number 2 is not following up with the left hook punch quickly enough or even at all, okay? Often, a lot of the time, we're able to land that overhand, but it's actually the left hook that does the damage. And the reason why is because most people will kind of somewhat see the overhand coming because it is quite a big punch, but the left hook, the one that follows up after, they're not always expecting it. And that's why it's really important to land that overhand and come straight back with the hook. So we're literally going inside overhand, across hook. The next combination that we're going to go through is the fake lead teep to straight punch. So step number 1 is you want to lift your leg up like so, okay, in a rather dramatic fashion and quite quickly. So basically what you want to do is like this, okay, and then tip number 2 or step number 2 is we're going to hop forward. So we're going to lift the leg up and hop forward, okay, so that is tip 1 and 2. And tip number 3, we're going to come through with that straight punch to the body on the end. So fake, drop that punch in, or we can throw that straight punch to the head. Fake and to the head. 2 common mistakes that beginners often make is number 1, they don't sell the teep well enough. So they'll do this. So it's really important to make sure that you don't make that mistake. Lift your leg up high enough and really sell that teep, okay? You want to practice just getting people to react first before you even bring in the straight punch. So that's number 1. Number 2, in terms of mistakes that I often see, is they'll fake with the teep and then they'll throw their straight right or their straight to the head, but they completely forget about their guard. So it's really important that, you know, even though you're coming in off a fake and your opponent's probably covering up, you still want to make sure you're keeping that guard nice and tight when you're throwing that right hand to either the head or to the body. The next combination we're going to go through is a fake rear kick to straight punch. Tip number 1, make sure that you've set it up, okay? Make sure that you've landed at least 2 or 3 good right kicks on your opponent and you know that you have that there. Once you've got that, tip number 2, you're going to slide your foot up as you would be throwing a kick, okay? So you're going to slide up like so, and then you're going to bring your leg back and throw a punch. And it's a very quick movement. So tip number 2, slide up, and then tip number 3, come back, throw your punch. Now your punch can be thrown at either the body or the head. 2 common mistakes that a lot of people make when throwing this combination is, number 1, they don't take the time to set the shot up first, okay? So as we discussed previously, it's really important that you throw those kicks first to to get the technique set up. So that's the first mistake. People will just throw this technique and they've not taken any time to set it up and it doesn't land, okay? And then mistake number 2 that's really common is just not quite grasping the footwork or how to sell the shot, okay? So remember what we're doing is we're just sliding and we're slightly throwing our arm like this to really get that reaction, get our opponent to lift their leg up or try to block the kick. From there, we're gonna slide the leg back, recenter, take a step forward and fire that right hand out. The next combination that we're going to go through is the fake jab to lead hook. Now this is again another one of my favorite combinations. It works really, really well in terms of getting your opponent to react and then countering or capitalizing immediately by coming through on a different angle with a powerful shot like a hook. Tip number 1 to demonstrating or mastering this technique is as follows, okay? So basically what we want to do is we want to start with the feint, okay? Or the fake, I should say. So we're going to just do like a half jab, like this. We're not going to fully extend our arm out. We're just going to fake like this. And then that's tip number 1. Tip number 2, we're going to step out to the side a little bit and forward, okay? Because that's going to give us the range on our hook. And then from there, we're going to pivot across. Tip number 3, whipping our hook into the side of our opponent's head. 2 mistakes that beginners often make when throwing the fake jab to lead hook are as follows. When throwing, well, mistake number 1, when throwing the fake jab, they don't sell it. It's really important that you have to sell that shot, moving your whole body. And remember, we're only throwing about half of our jab, just like this. This is a whole jab, this is a fake jab, okay? So all we're trying to do is just get a reaction out of our opponents. Remember that if your opponent doesn't react, don't follow up with that hook, as you may get countered and get hurt. Mistake number 2 that most beginners will do or experience when throwing the fake jab to lead hook is that they don't step after they throw the fake jab. Remember, it is super, super important that you take that extra step because that's going to give you a whole lot more range on your hook. I'm going to demonstrate what that looks like now, okay? So if I fake jab and I just hook on the spot, you can see my range is very limited. Fake jab, hook, okay? You can see there that I'm not quite able to get enough range on the hook. But if I take that step, fake jab, step forward here, bang, I can land that hook and I've got a lot more range. So you can see from here, no step, step, boom.